who people are trickling in slowly. So we wanted to make sure that we have as many people here as we begin. So I just wanted to welcome everybody here to our discussion and our roundtable. I welcome you on behalf of the UNDP's Equator Initiative and also the WIN, which is the World Network of Indigenous Peoples and Local Community Land and Sea Managers. So thank you all for coming this afternoon on a Friday after a long week. But we're very happy to be hosting this side event titled Sharing Knowledge, a conversation on approaches to traditional knowledge sharing. We want this to be, we really want to focus on the discussion and your questions. So we've asked the panelists to keep their interventions short so that we can make short and provocative so that we can make sure that we have time for a good debate here. We have something to eat, so please feel free to have something to eat. We have interpretation. So get your... O sea, hay entrevistamos, o sea, hay traducción al español, así que pueden ir a buscar el auricular. And then please grab a chair and join us. We'd like to discuss today, I think they're very relevant topics, and it's really about how knowledge at the moment, indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, is being documented, and how it's being used. How it's being used by the private sector, by the UN, by other civil society organizations, people, the public at large. We're going to look at how digital technology is playing a big role now in how knowledge is being documented. We'd like to look at what are the challenges that presents, what are the threats that presents as well to the knowledge holders, and also we'd like to discuss the issues around free, prior, and informed consent and ownership, and also we'd like to look at other, we move away from digital technology and look at other programs that are starting to come up in academia as well, looking at these issues of documentation and how knowledge is being captured and shared. So we'll have also the perspective from WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and also from the Millennium Campaign, which is an arm also of the UN system. We also are expecting another panelist, but I don't think she's arrived yet, so hopefully she'll be coming soon, Lucy Ulenke. Okay, so, and great, we're having more. Welcome everyone, bienvenidos. Okay, so I'm going to hand the floor now to Michaela Jade, who works with PricewaterhouseCoopers, digital consulting, based in Australia. And we met at the World Parks Congress, and we met before that in Darwin. And also, I'd like to invite Angela Avila, who is part of the Innovation, Technology and Culture, also from Australia, to begin their discussion on issues around digital technology, and also looking at also some of the perspectives coming from the private sector, from private enterprise. Okay, so I'll have the floor, and I'll wait for everyone, please. Feel free to do as you did. Grab some chairs. There's something to eat as well. Okay.
Thank you, I am an Aboriginal Australian woman. I am also a scientist, and for the past 2 years I have been working between cultural knowledge traditional knowledge through a system called augmented reality, which is very difficult to do. You have to see it. You use your mobile phone to have the elders come out of your phone and tell you the story of the place where you're standing. Through that process, I discovered that technology is collecting a large amount of private and personal data on us all as we carry around things like mobile phones, which is referred to as passive data. And then I started looking into what new technologies were coming and how they might impact our people and our ability to maintain ownership of our cultural knowledge. Some of these technologies are already on our country, and we might not know about it. One of these technologies that is very interesting for Indigenous communities is drones, which I have a picture. These fly above our country in a map and can take photos of our cultural places, and they can also stream this information to the internet. So I looked at digital sovereignty. So when our information gets put into a digital format, that data then lives potentially in another country. And how do we then own that? So that is the work that I do. I will hand to Angie Abdullah.
Hi everybody, my name is Angie Abdullah. I'm also an Aboriginal Australian woman. I come from Tasmania, which is it's a small island, which is actually not that small, it's the size of Ireland, but it's at the very bottom of Australia. My people are the Trawlers. I'm originally I've been a filmmaker working in film and TV and Western documentary for many years. And I've used our oral culture and our innate connection as storytellers as a way of transgressing over into digital technologies and different platforms. So I'm really interested in the new digital technologies that potentially give us different ways of telling a story. But through that, I've also been looking at traditional knowledge and how traditional knowledge and the custodianship of traditional knowledge can potentially inform how we design new digital technologies. So through this interest, I wrote a paper, an article, and I've been looking at how our traditional knowledge in Australia, how when we start looking at songlines, it's a way of being, if you're able to have an aerial view of country, then we have this thing, pattern thinking. So an Indigenous paradigm, Indigenous knowledge is a way of being able to understand country and our connection to country and kinships, which is very different to the Western paradigm. And so thinking about new digital technology and the way in which technology is designed, I think that we can learn a lot from our own traditional knowledge and how it could potentially inform not just new design in technology, but also it could create different ways how we design artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of issues with artificial intelligence. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about it, and it may seem a little bit sort of far off, but these phones that most people have in their pockets, they're all this artificial intelligence. It's autonomous systems that are directing this sort of technology. The problem is that if we continue to, well, there are a lot of people that consider there's problems with the way in which technology is being designed, and it's technology for technology's sake, and there's no connection with technology is superseding human connection, and it's quite at odds with traditional ways of connecting. So I'm really interested to go back to what traditional knowledge is, and those ceremonial aspects of how traditional knowledge is passed over, and go back to looking at those ways, those structures, and think about how we could maybe design technology, Indigenous people design technology that has new meaning and new connection if we are using the basis of that pattern to inform systems design and product design and so forth.
Thank you, Angie and Michaela. I wanted to ask Michaela if you could talk a little bit about the work that you've done or your research on wearable technology, and also maybe to give us some examples of your work in this area and the challenges and the opportunities of it as well.
Thank you, Alejandra. So who's seen Google Glass? Has anybody seen Google Glass? Basically, this is a wearable computer on your head. Okay? So it has this picture. It has an inward-facing camera that looks into your eye, and an outward-facing camera that can not only capture video and images, but it also can do things like three-dimensionally landscape scan at our places. Here it is. Thank you. So Google brought this out as an experiment, and it's now being put away for the time being. But many other technology companies have developed simultaneously similar kinds of things which are available to buy. Now you can buy them. The thing that came upon me when I was wearing Google Glass was profound, because for the first time this device, I could be looking at a cultural place of my people or somebody else's, and it has a time, date, location stamp of where that is. It records the trail of how I got there, and it can send it straight out to the internet. So once that it goes out to the internet, I started asking, do our people own this information? Is it still ours if we're putting it out to the internet for everybody to consume? And young people, I found in our communities, want this. They want these devices. They think they're very cool. And I think elders in our community need to be brought across what these new technologies are, so they can make a determination about whether they come into the country, and about whether we encourage our kids to use these things, whether we set protocols for using these things on country. There's four really basic questions that we should be asking anytime any technology gets developed with us or for us. And that's firstly, what information is that device
collecting on you. So these devices monitor lots of things about your own body, but also through you. So what is this device collecting about, our people, our country, everything that in essence is cultural and is sacred or secret to us? So that's the first question. And with that question is, what is it collecting that we control? So when we take a photo or a video, and what is it collecting that we don't control? Like all the passive information that is collected on us as we wear the device. The second question is, who owns that data? So who owns it when we wear these devices or we carry even these phones onto our country? Who owns that data? So in Australia, like I mentioned before, we don't have large server farms, so a lot of our data is put into another country. And who owns that when we're using a platform that's developed by a private corporation? Do they own that data? Do the country that have the data stored in the country own that data? And these are individual questions when we're using different technologies and platforms. The third question is, where is the data being stored? So we need to know where we're putting these things that we're creating or that are being created for us as we interface with these technologies. And the fourth question we ask is, can all this information be given back to us? If we want to experiment with data in our culture or with digital in our culture, and the experiment fails for whatever reason, can we get this data back, and can we have the right to destroy it? So they're the four questions that I encourage all Indigenous peoples around the world to ask. And in Australia we have a mining company that has just given $3 million Australian dollars to a community to go and digitise their culture. So tell us where these sites are, give us a video, give us a picture, give us your language, or not give us specifically, sorry, I should say, they have given the money to the community to do that for themselves. But to me, I would have to ask why. Why? So that's some of the issues. I covered that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Angie, do you have something to add?
I thought it might be important to remember as well that some of the main issues that a lot of our elders in Australia are quite vocal about is the handing on of traditional knowledge and the custodianship of that knowledge. It seems to be a really big issue for our communities. Our people our mortality rate is quite low, so our people are dying much earlier and younger, and our people are much older when they're considered of right age or of right or ready to be bestowed important information and going through those traditional initiations. So the time has compressed, and so there's a lot of fear and risk of that knowledge being lost because there's things that young ones aren't ready, basically. So there's a lot of elders who do believe that there is a need to digitise their culture, our culture, those stories, those really important stories, knowledge, what happens to it if their young ones just simply aren't ready to take that information on. We'll put it on the internet, we'll put it in some sort of form, and hopefully it'll be there for the young ones to access. But I guess some of the questions I've come up with are the transmission of that important knowledge. When thinking about knowledge and being and knowing, and the transmission of traditional knowledge, there are certain rituals and ceremonies that go alongside that transmission of knowledge, which it's alive. That knowledge has life within it because of its being an oral culture, but also because of I think essentially because of those initiations and that knowledge is embedded within country and within us. because of the ceremonial aspects to that knowledge. So what happens when knowledge gets just dumped all of a sudden into a time capsule? Does the veracity of that knowledge stay with it? I think there's a lot of really important questions we need to be really mindful of what knowledge is and what happens to knowledge when you simply put it onto the internet. Like Michaela's got a fantastic analogy of how a particular
so I have some friends that work in cultural tourism, and they explained to me that 5 years ago the Mutijulu people gave the knowledge to this tour company so they could bring Chinese tourists to come and see the Aboriginal cultural site. And over only 5 years, the story went from being the story that was told by the Mutijulu people to share to something completely over here, totally different. So Chinese whispers through the company and not having that imperative to share the knowledge properly has meant that only 5 years it's disappeared into a different story. And our people, the way that we have translated knowledge, it's tens of thousands of years old, and it's very, very accurate. It's Western science is coming now to Australia and saying, actually that story that you have about the palm trees coming to here, it correlates exactly with the timescale that Western science has been able to verify. So it's like, yeah, we knew what we were talking about, right?
Thanks so much for that, and I think also that last point of this interface between Western science and Indigenous knowledge and science is critical. So I'd like to pass the discussion now to Edward D., who's come from Arizona here in the United States. And Edward works with the Global Program for Traditional Knowledge and Sustainability at the Arizona State University. So, Edward, please introduce yourself, and we look forward to hearing your story.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Ja, Edward D. Winshia. It's on Winshia, which is Chief, what's up, That is by way of introducing myself in our Navajo Dene language. Basically what I said is I'm of the folded arm people, my paternal mother's side. My father's side is of the Bitterwater people. My paternal grandmother is of the Mini Goats people, and the paternal grandfather is of the Big Water people. That is key, that's traditional, that's who I am as a man. I'm from the Four Corners region, the northeastern part of the state of Arizona. Basically on the high Colorado Plateau, what we call within the 4 6 mountains of the Net people. Again, just like Alejandra said, that my work is at Arizona State University in the School of Sustainability. Within that school is also a Global Institute of Sustainability, recently named to Julie Ann Ridley Global Institute of Sustainability. And just recently here, within the last 2 months or so, a new initiative by President Crow, Michael Crow, the ASU president, who is basically an innovative thinker, put together a new program called the Global Program for Indigenous Knowledge and Sustainability. A gentleman with the National Geographic Science Society has recently been tapped for that job as a new director. Chris Rainier is his name. He was supposed to be here. He is in China doing some other work. It is a brand new program. Again, the idea is to capture traditional knowledge, global traditional knowledge, and to put together a living archive, if you will. A lot of it will be digital, through different forms of medium, whether it be video, audio, and written recording. And we feel that that's something that's been quite outstanding. Sort of stepping back, the School of Sustainability at Arizona State is the first of its kind in the nation. Since then, this is about 9 years or so ago now, since then other universities have come online to put together sustainability programs for bachelor's degree, master's degree, and PhD degree. So again, at ASU, we feel like that this is a new path, you know, it's a break from path dependency of traditional silo teaching. This is an interdisciplinary approach using all forms of background in terms of how sustainability is taught, and now we are approaching indigenous knowledge. So that's basically the work that I do, and again, the idea, because of it's in its infancy stage, the approach is this. On the one hand, they would like to put together a committee of scholars within the academic community. By what I mean is sustainability scientists will make up one body of committee. On the other hand, they would like to put together a traditional knowledge holder committee that is non-academic in nature. Again, it's one of these things where in the past, a lot of you know who are in this area, that it's like basically mixing oil and water. For years, it wasn't recognized, it was disputed, it was somewhat relegated. Again, the issue was, at least from the Western scientists, it was validity. It was how do we validate your knowledge? How do we test it? How does it hold up? So I think we're getting beyond that now. So basically now, seemingly things have shifted where now we're talking the sensitivity issue as opposed to the validity. I think the Western scientists have gone beyond validity. Now the ball is in the traditional indigenous knowledge before. And the idea, just as the two ladies here had spoke about, is how much should we share? How much should we report? How much of the traditional knowledge, a lot of it is sacred, a lot of it is used still ceremoniously. I know, speaking for my tribe as the Navajo people, a lot of our ceremonies are deeply sacred. They're also seasonal. Some stories, some ceremonies occur with the season. Certainly, a lot of it, the most sacred, is over the winter period. So, even as a scholar, and even myself, you know, I can't necessarily go out and do my field work outside the winter season. So, stuff like that, and I think that's where things are at. Is now the indigenous knowledge holder have a stake at the table in terms of how much is shared. So that's on behalf of the global program on traditional knowledge and sustainability. And what's on the screen up here is my work, and that's basically using the Mother Earth, Father Sky sand painting right in the middle. That's basically a 9-night shooting weight ceremony. It's a 9-night ceremony. There are other sand paintings that are shaped inside the Hogan floor, and this is the last of the night, the 9th night. It culminates all previous sand painting. And I also have a picture of it here. So this is what we call Mother Earth, Father Sky. Nahastan, the mother, as you can see, is on the left. The right is the Father Sky. So that's a systems thinking perspective, if you will, parallel to what the Western scientists will call it. It's a holistic thinking. Everything is interconnected, interdependent, interrelated. And that's everything in our Navajo paradigm, Navajo society. Just as I said about my 4 clans, there are interrelated, interdependent, the 4 seasons, the 4 world with which we came through our emergence stories. So when we pray, we say, giving credence and amen to all the 4 gods and 4 airs and the 4 sacred mountains and the 4 directions. So this is a systems perspective. And within sustainability, the SES framework, the social ecological systems, that is derived from a lot of the work has been done by Eleanor Ostrom. And she started working on this at Indiana University. Fortunately, she went to ASU and continued her work there before she passed. And so when I study that system, there are similarities between the SES framework and what I intend to capture here using the Navajo thinking, the Navajo paradigm. And in it, it addresses all sacredness. It addresses the ceremonialism, as opposed to Western side, it doesn't really touch the spiritual concept or the sacredness to some extent. It basically only addresses somewhat of an economic perspective and some livelihood and other areas within sustainability. So I envision, and this is something that I think will be unique within sustainability, that is and could be used by other indigenous groups, not only the Navajos, but other tribes and certain other indigenous people around the world. And it's basically a framework that I also like for the non-Native American or non-indigenous people to use and to be aware and sensitive of how they do sustainability work. So that's basically my work, and of course you can read it yourself, and I don't want to get into the nuggets and the nuts and bolts of it and take up too much of your time. So that's basically who I am and my purpose, to sit here at the table and have a discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edward. That was great. The issue of sensitivity now is being the issue rather than validity, and sharing what the academic world is doing now, and also the Navajo people. So I'd like to now hand over this mic to Heian Twalima, who is originally from Samoa and is the Indigenous Fellow at the World Intellectual Property Organization. So she'll be sharing some of the tools that are being built from WIPO to build capacity as well on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandra. So, as Alejandra said, I'll share about some of the tools, and specifically I will look at the WIPO Traditional Knowledge Documentation Toolkit. I won't go into the nitty-gritty of the toolkit. I'll give you a very brief introduction to it. Basically, the toolkit provides a means for the traditional knowledge holders to identify and collect the knowledge, and then have a means to store it. So that may be through film, recording, and what have you. So it's not in itself a means of providing protection. It's a bit more complex than something I won't elaborate right now, but I guess it's enough to know for now that it is a place to be able to store some traditional knowledge.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll turn now to our last speaker so that we can engage with some questions. Juan Chelvi, who's with the Millennium Campaign here at the UN, and looking at also at how to use the Millennium Campaign as well now in the post-2015 development agenda. So he'll be sharing a bit how they're using technology to put together information coming from the UN, from civil society, and how this can also be applicable and maybe useful for this discussion as well.
Thank you, Alejandro. Yes, my name is Juan Chebli. I work for the UN Millennium Campaign. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I see that this is an amazing conversation, intergenerational, great gender balance, and of course, here at UNDP, today we're celebrating actually 25 years of the first Human Development Report. So it's a big milestone, and it's great to be discussing these topics. But I wanted to share with you today a little bit about the work that we do at the UN Millennium Campaign, which is an initiative founded by our former Secretary General, Kofi Annan, which was meant to really promote the Millennium Development Goals. Are you guys familiar with the Millennium Development Goals? Raise your hand. I guess we all are. One drawback about the Millennium Development Goals, if anybody can highlight or point one flaw of the Millennium Development Goals, what would you say? Great. Somebody's saying, Roberto, how are you? They didn't mention indigenous people. Why was that?
Because they wanted to make the agenda universal.
They wanted to make the agenda universal. Were you consulted on what the MDGs should be?
I wasn't.
Well, I was a bit young at that age, but Masu and Roberto, you know, were you already involved in these topics? And it's a shame, but it actually was a very top-down approach on what development should be. And this actually caused the fact that, you know, we had to create a whole campaign to promote and create awareness about the MDGs. So this time around, being loyal to the UN founding charter, so can anybody tell me what are the three first words of the UN founding charter, the preface?
We the people.
I hear we the peoples, we the peoples. Let's say it, you know, one time and again, because I think that the concept of inclusion sometimes gets lost, and the concept of participation sometimes is missing in the halls of the UN. And this is exactly what we have been trying to change. And we have been doing that through two main platforms. The first one is a global survey. It's called the My World Survey. It's reached out to about 7 million people worldwide in 194 countries. About 80% of the votes are coming from paper ballots, pen and paper ballots, because we understand that in order to reach the most marginalized, the most excluded, we needed to use a combination of traditional and modern technologies. So you could fill out the survey also through your mobile phone or through a website. So if you haven't done so, you still have a chance, Roberto, to participate and tell the UN what you think the SDGs should include. But then we have a second platform, and we understood that, you know, a survey is great for some people. You know, it takes 5 minutes at the most, but then some people want to get more involved at a more substantive level. So together with civil society, we have created a platform, and this platform is a platform, it's an open forum where you can, at the more substantive level, participate in different consultations that have been going on. We have held, through the help of the UN system, over more than 100 national consultations, 11 thematic consultations with experts, and then we also launched a round on how to implement this agenda. So, you know, basically opening the window, opening the door, and listening to what people want this agenda to be. And finally, you know, given the context of today, we wanted to really show how this looks like. Because what we found out is we ended up with over 1,600 documents. You know, voices of people, aspirations, dreams of people, you know, in indigenous communities, in the most remote communities that you can imagine, thanks to, you know, volunteerism around the world, young people riding bicycles and reaching out. But we ended up with all this input, which even when it was summarized, still, 1,600, we actually estimate over 1 million qualitative inputs. I mean, that's a big number. A PhD dissertation only takes about, what, 20 qualitative inputs. Here, we're sitting and we're looking at 1 million qualitative inputs. Now, how do we make sense of all of this? And how do we make sure that then the politicians across the street, as they gather today and through the week to discuss how we're going to finance sustainable development, how do we convey that message? How do we amplify people's voices? Well, here's one solution. The visualization that you have on the screen actually allows you to browse different data sets, whether they are UN-led consultations or consultations initiated by civil society. But let me point to the Equator Initiative. Thank you, Equator Initiative, for organizing this wonderful event. Here there are 250 or 150 case studies that feature solutions from communities, local communities worldwide. And you can easily browse them and learn from them. All you have to do is select the data set and click on search, and then you'll find that, you know, the Equator Initiative case studies are mainly touching upon the issues that matter most to local communities. Here you can see it; it's very prominent. But then you can browse, you know, what are the topics that are being most mentioned, and also what are the relationships among them. So if you're coming from the women's constituency, you can click on that particular issue and see how that relates to, say, forests. And then what you're going to find out is that, hey, there are actually 24 documents within the Equator Initiative case studies that are touching upon the issue of women and forests. And then you can get a list of documents, and then voila, the document pops up, and you can learn what the women of Guatemala were doing in terms of finding sustainable development solutions for their forest. So here you have it, worldwewant2015.org. If you want to vote on the survey, please visit myworld2015.org. If you have any questions, I'll be happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the panelists. I wanted to know if there were, well, we'd like to open obviously the floor to everyone, and also if there are any questions from our guests here to the UN representatives here as well. So we open who would like to start our discussion? I'm sure there are lots of questions here with all of the interesting information that's been shared here.
Buenas tardes. Primero agradecer a cada uno de los ponentes, temas muy interesantes para nosotros. En relación al hermano de la Universidad de Arizona, pues quería comentarle y a todos ustedes que soy parte de la red de mujeres indígenas sobre biodiversidad para América Latina y el Caribe. Entonces, los temas que él está tratando de trabajar, pues nosotros tenemos una experiencia ya bastante con CBD, especialmente el artículo 8J. Entonces, no es nuevo lo que él ha comentado para nosotros, porque ya hemos trabajado en Panamá sobre esta cuestión del conocimiento científico, el conocimiento indígena. Entonces, si gusta, podemos intercambiar ideas, podemos cooperar, y también como academia de parte de la Universidad de Nuevo México. Gracias.
Ya que está mi nombre es María Eugenia Choque, soy de Bolivia, miembro del Foro Permanente. También estamos dos hermanos del Foro Permanente, José y Jerry. Entonces,
she was introducing herself, María Eugenia Choque, who is from Bolivia and a member of the Permanent Forum.
lo que yo quería, bueno, los aportes respecto al conocimiento tradicional, y agradezco por esta oportunidad por este evento, porque es difícil, diremos, de que el tema de conocimiento tradicional, cuando no se conoce, es difícil incidir, diremos, en algunas recomendaciones para el foro permanente, y yo agradezco en esta oportunidad a ustedes por levantar este tema, diremos, en el marco del foro permanente. Y ustedes saben que hoy en la mañana tuvimos la mesa sobre indicadores en conocimiento tradicional, y también vamos a tener la presentación del informe sobre conocimiento tradicional. Entonces creo que es importante, diremos, recabar la importancia del tema. En ese sentido es que el tema de conocimiento tradicional ciertamente, diremos, viene de un largo trabajo, y
traditional knowledge, this is something that's very important, and many times we don't know how to engage in this topic of traditional knowledge within the permanent forum, but we have to raise the topic of this idea of traditional knowledge within the permanent forum. As you know, today there was a discussion on indicators on traditional knowledge, and there's a report that will be given on traditional knowledge, and we have to highlight the importance of traditional knowledge, and it has a long history coming from all our peoples.
En el marco de la recuperación del conocimiento tradicional, por la experiencia personal, se ha venido trabajando, por ejemplo, en la cuestión de la historia oral, ¿no? como método, como instrumento para recuperar, diremos, los conocimientos y saberes. En ese sentido, por ejemplo, mitos, leyendas, historias de vida, historia de cómo fue la educación, historia de, bueno, de líderes indígenas. Nos hemos basado en el tema de recuperar la historia oral.
So we would like to recover this traditional knowledge. For example, my personal experience recovering the oral history. What methods and instruments can we use to recover our wisdom, our knowledge, our myths, legends, the personal histories of our peoples, our education, the indigenous peoples' leaders, how we can recover all this information.
Y en un inicio, el trabajo de la historia oral conllevó un nivel político de reivindicación de derechos, ¿no? O sea, no solamente fue un trabajo académico, sí se hizo un trabajo académico, tuvimos la oportunidad de hacer muchos libros en idiomas como por ejemplo los cuentos, los mitos en Aymara, por ejemplo, en programas de radionovela en idioma aymara. Eso fortaleció la identidad de los pueblos, porque la gente escuchando decía, yo también tengo mi historia.
So the oral history, in order to recover this, to recoup our rights, to vindicate our rights, and this can not only be done within the academic world, but with books, because we do have some books that were written in Aymara, the Aymara language, and where we were able to recover our, keep our history on myths and legends and so on. And also we had a radio program, and when our people listened to these ideas about oral history, they were able to strengthen their identity as oral people, because they were saying, yes, I too relate to this, I too have my story.
Entonces, en la cuestión así de cuando estuve escuchando la comparación, por ejemplo, el hermano que en la exposición señalaba respecto, diremos, a la relación de la madre tierra en ese entorno integral, de arriba, de abajo, de izquierda, derecha, o sea, toda esta cuestión de ver cómo la cosmovisión siempre y la espiritualidad de los pueblos está basado en aquello que es diremos, la vida del ser humano o la vida de los pueblos, del hombre y la mujer, tiene una relación muy estrecha con el mundo integral de la naturaleza. O sea, la vida de los pueblos indígenas también es reflejo de la naturaleza.
So indigenous people's way of life really reflects nature, and our way of life is really connected to Mother Earth. We have a world view of our spirituality, and Mother Earth is something that's a complete, comprehensive, integral way of looking at life. As I was listening to my brother here and how he made that comparison of how important it is for everything. It's something comprehensive, holistic.
Y con esto termino. En el tema de digitalización del conocimiento tradicional estamos hablando de poner el conocimiento tradicional al contexto público. Y esto es es una preocupación, lo hemos visto así, y también en el marco, como decía mi hermana Yolanda, en el marco del proceso del convenio de biodiversidad y también en el marco de la OMPI. ¿Qué se dice y qué no se dice? ¿Qué se digitaliza y qué no se digitaliza? Obviamente pasa por la cuestión de la consulta, el consentimiento, siempre se ha enfatizado los principios, ¿verdad? De qué se dice y qué no, pero esto también es una preocupación cuando hablamos sobre todo del conocimiento tradicional espiritual, al cual nos ha dicho los ancianos y las hermanas de la escuela.
As our brothers and sisters here have mentioned, that how is it that we digitalize our knowledge? When we do digitalize our indigenous knowledge, then it becomes something that belongs to the public. It's within the context of the public. So this is worrisome to have our traditional knowledge within this context. And also in different frameworks, like within the CBD and within WIPO, what do we decide? What will be shared and what will not be shared? What will be digitalized? What will not be digitalized? our lives, and how can we get all this information? We need to do it with consultation, with consent, and using those principles that we have within traditional knowledge.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Mutani. I'm a member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and I come from Kenya. I want to support my sister Choki Maria on indigenous knowledge, but I want to approach it from the aspect of mainstreaming indigenous knowledge in sustainable development. Mainstreaming in a way that you are using indigenous knowledge to be in application maybe to traditional medicines, traditional foods, and all that is what now and also in climate change, because it has been seen like indigenous knowledge is the answer to the way the climate change is impacting on indigenous people. So mainstreaming the indigenous knowledge in sustainable development, especially in the areas of traditional medicines, traditional foods, and also trying to look at how the indigenous knowledge could be used also in natural products, in development of natural products. For example, the communities in Kenya are trying to use some of the indigenous trees, indigenous plants to make cosmetics, to make soaps and all that. And these are going into the supermarkets. And I think that is what I'm saying by sustainable development. So it's not just the indigenous knowledge, just the knowledge itself only, but it is how to use that knowledge for development. It is also important to encourage in databasing, creating databases for this indigenous knowledge, and also trying to see how that knowledge can also be applied in science, or rather trying to bring in science to improve some of the applications of traditional knowledge. For example, in traditional medicines, the application of science in trying to improve some of the traditional methods of making traditional medicines, so that those medicines, once they go through clinical analysis, can enter into the primary health care of hospitals. And instead of now governments trying to buy these exotic medicines, they can be buying these traditional medicines to put them in hospitals. So I think that is what I'm saying by mainstreaming indigenous knowledge in sustainable development. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Joseph?
I just have one real quick question. Who will have access? Basic question. Who will have access to this? Real basic question. Who will have access to the traditional knowledge? Who will have the right to have access?
Just one more question here, and then we'll have the panelists respond, and then we'll take some more questions.
Thanks. A couple of quick notes. Firstly, to follow up my colleague from WIPO, it's important to emphasize that the WIPO, John Scott, the Senior Policy Officer for Traditional Knowledge at the Convention on Biological Diversity, so also an Aboriginal Australian. I want to pick up a number of things. Firstly, I know I lost my train of thought, but anyway, firstly, the WIPO toolkit starts with the first chapter, which takes communities through a process looking at the consequences, both negative and positive, of documenting your knowledge. So it's very important to realize it's not a toolkit for documenting knowledge. The first stage gives you all the information you need to decide whether you wish to go down that path or not. So it's a very important aspect of the toolkit. Also, the Convention on Biodiversity currently is negotiating guidelines for national legislation and other national arrangements to ensure that traditional knowledge is accessed through the prior and informed consent of the Indigenous knowledge holders. that if a company wants to use the knowledge and the Indigenous knowledge holders agree, that they enter into mutually agreed terms and receive an equitable sharing of benefits. So these are very important standards that we're working on. The question of who accesses the knowledge, the standard the CBD is working on is that knowledge is only accessed with prior and informed consent, mutually agreed terms and benefit sharing arrangements. Now, to pick up on what Joseph said about the use of traditional knowledge, because the convention also promotes the use of traditional knowledge with the prior and informed consent of the knowledge holders, it's very important we have this protection in place, because then Indigenous peoples will feel safe to share our knowledge. But until this protection is in place, it's very difficult for us to share our knowledge. So it's important to recognise that. We're also working on, finally, guidelines to stop the misappropriation of traditional knowledge. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Okay.
Buenos días, soy Michael Quispe, acompaño acá a Diana, que es la líder mashénica de Perú-Brasil, de la frontera. Y respecto a este tema...
My name is Margot Quispe, and I'm here accompanying this woman from Peru, the border of Peru and Brazil. She's Ashaninka, and Diana.
Porque en Perú el gobierno ha estado tratando de crear un fondo para que toda compañía que quiere utilizar el conocimiento tradicional de los pueblos pueda poner un aporte, ¿no? Para que este aporte beneficie a la comunidad de la que procede este conocimiento tradicional, y tal vez un porcentaje de esto para un fondo común que sirva para promover mecanismos de protección. Pero yo me pregunto, aquí en realidad se trata de eso, ¿no? De cómo generar mecanismos de protección de este conocimiento tradicional, porque ya se tiene este marco que lo he explicado muy bien, hay un marco internacional, cómo aterrizar en marcos normativos nacionales para, en función a eso, asegurar este conocimiento tradicional. Estamos hablando de la protección que se lee en una protección plena y efectiva.
So, in Peru, the government created a fund for the use of indigenous peoples and their traditional knowledge, and so they were able to the proposal came from the government, so they received contributions in order to benefit indigenous peoples so that they could have this common fund, and it was so in order to protect, it's like a mechanism to protect traditional knowledge. But what I ask myself is, how do we protect this traditional knowledge, especially within this international framework? Could there be standard setting processes within this international framework in order to protect, because that's the aim, is to protect traditional knowledge?
I think we have to also remember who we need protection from. Like, who are we, what our traditional knowledge is being sought by who, and what sort of what sort of guidelines within the UN are going to be able to protect traditional knowledge and communities around the world from extraction industries and technological corporations. I think the intervention that we delivered yesterday, Michaela delivered yesterday, was addressing that. We need to have a dialogue with corporations to be able to have some protocols that with the UN and the states, there needs to be a conversation